Jason's hands trembled as he turned the small USB drive over in his palm, its cold metallic surface a stark contrast to the heat rising in his chest. The message had arrived that morning, unsigned and cryptic. "Your wife is not who you think she is. Check the drive." "Radio C," Jason said, as he opened the drive and recruited everybody inside. Sitting at his home office desk, surrounded by the polished wood and sleek metal of their upscale apartment, Jason inserted the USB into his laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing a folder labeled simply Amanda. Inside were emails, dozens of them. The words spilled out in intimate, candid exchanges between Amanda and someone signed G. Some messages were harmless at first glance, cloaked in professionalism, but as he read further, their nature grew unmistakable. Flirty witticisms became declarations of desire. Attached were photos, ones Jason recognized as taken on nights when Amanda had claimed to be working late. And on the last 2 pages, Jason found 3 text messages. One message read this: "Menanda, Jason, right here, right now, if you want me. I'd write you back." Jason leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. For weeks, there had been signs. Amanda's phone tilted just out of sight during texts. Her sudden insistence on taking her work calls in their bedroom. But he had chalked it up to her high-stress job. Now, the proof was undeniable. A slideshow of memories played in Jason's head. Her radiant smile on their wedding day, the way she curled up next to him during movie nights, her voice laughing over breakfast. The betrayal cut deep. But as his initial wave of anguish subsided, a cold resolve took its place. Jason's eyes narrowed as he considered his next move. The files weren't just proof, they were ammunition. Amanda's work email address was in the correspondence. That alone could devastate her career. His jaw clenched. This wasn't just personal, it was public. Amanda had built her reputation at her corporate firm on trust, poise, and professionalism. To think she was risking it all for this? Star-crossed ashes? He turned his attention to the magazine. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Amanda. "Don't forget about tonight's gala. Big night for me," the text read, punctuated with a smiley face. Jason stared at the message, the image of her carefree enthusiasm clashing with the damning evidence he now held. Her promotion was practically in the bag, and tonight's event was meant to celebrate her upcoming success. She was famous. She was known around the campus, and the more he studied her, the more impressed he became with the certainty. He opened a private browser window and began searching. He wanted to know more about G. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Gerald Harper, her direct supervisor, the man whose signature could finalize her promotion. Gerald was a handsome man with a sober, respectable appearance, heavy eyebrows, and cool black hair. He looked the image of casualness. Jason leaned back, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. So, that's how she was climbing the corporate ladder? He closed the browser and stared at the screen, his plan forming. Tonight, Amanda's double life would unravel. Not in the secrecy of their apartment, but under the glaring lights of her glamorous event. By the time he was done, the facade of her perfect life would be in tatters. Jason shut his laptop with finality, muttering under his breath, "She'll thank me later." Jason stood before the full-length mirror in his bedroom, adjusting his tie with deliberate precision. His reflection stared back at him, a calm veneer masking the storm raging inside. The gala invitation lay on the dresser, its elegant script a cruel irony in light of what he had discovered. Amanda had circled the date weeks ago on their shared calendar, excitedly calling it the biggest night of her career, and purposely misexplained why she wasn't at it. And now things were starting to make sense. The greatest party in all of Russia had just turned tragic. And there was a biggest night indeed, Jason muttered as he straightened his suit jacket. Amanda breezed into the room, her heels clicking softly against the polished wood floor. She looked radiant, draped in a shimmering silver gown that accentuated her every curve. Her golden hair was swept into an elegant updo, leaving her neck adorned with the diamond necklace Jason had given her on their 5th anniversary. She smiled at him, oblivious to the weight of his gaze. Her hair followed the curves of her body as she settled into a chair. She rested her hands on the wall, waiting for him. He smiled back, But his eyes were searching the room again for Jason, Sarah, and Dana. "Ready?" she asked, her voice lilting with excitement. Jason nodded, suppressing the urge to confront her then and there. Timing was everything. "You look stunning," he said, his tone carefully neutral. She beamed, leaning in to peck his cheek before stepping out to hail the car. He pushed the button on the way outside. The ride to the gala was filled with Amanda's chatter about the upcoming promotion and the networking opportunities the event would provide. Jason responded with practiced enthusiasm, masking the simmering tension in his chest. Every word she spoke felt like a thread unraveling the tapestry of their marriage. When he heard the screen door slam shut, he flung himself across the bookcase, almost falling into the water, where he fell on his face. When they arrived, the grand banquet hall was a spectacle of opulence. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, their light reflecting off polished marble floors and the glimmering attire of the city's corporate elite. Jason's eyes scanned the room, searching for Gerald Harper. It didn't take long to find him, a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair, holding court near the bar. His laughter boomed across the room, magnetic and self-assured. Jason's laughter rang louder, his face shining with a preparation to say, "Oh, the turn your lights, oh!" "Jason, come meet Gerald," Amanda said, tugging at his arm. "Perfect." Jason followed her lead, adopting an amiable smile as Amanda introduced them. Gerald extended a firm handshake, his grip exuding the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Jason met his gaze, noting the faint flicker of recognition when their hands met. "Jason's a famous horse. Best rider in the world," he said. "And then let me tell you one thing. Nobody will ever tell you what to do. I understand how important your job is, and your clients are responsible for you, so please don't feel the need to tell anybody else." Jason did the same thing with Jason's ex. "Amanda's been singing your praises," Jason said, his tone pleasant but laced with subtle mockery. "She's lucky to have such a supportive boss," Gerald chuckled, waving off the compliment. "Amanda's the real talent. I'd just make sure it's recognized." Jason's stomach churned, but he forced a polite nod. He excused himself to the bar, needing a moment to steel his resolve. As he ordered a whiskey neat, he pulled out his phone, reviewing the email he'd crafted earlier that afternoon. Attached were the damning photos, the explicit emails, everything Amanda had tried to hide. The recipient, Gerald's boss, the CEO of their company, who was also present at the gala. The subject line read, "Confidential, HR concern regarding Amanda Bennett and Gerald Harper." He commented on the photos, and the guidance counselor wrote him off. Jason's finger hovered over the send button. A part of him hesitated, wondering if there was still a shred of their relationship worth salvaging, but the memory of Amanda's deceit burned away any lingering doubts. He hit send. The message disappeared into cyberspace, and with it, Jason felt a strange sense of calm. The wheels were in motion now. All he had to do was wait. Back at their table, Amanda was engrossed in conversation with colleagues. Jason watched her, noting the ease with which she charmed everyone around her. It struck him how much effort she had put into maintaining her dual life. For a moment, he almost admired her ability to juggle it all. Almost. "There's the truth," he said. The reality was partially hidden by the false memories. "I think it's important for kids to see people like you," he said, and then regretted the lapse and bullshitting that emerged. This is fake. This wasn't real. The night progressed, the air buzzing with the kind of shallow camaraderie only corporate events could conjure. Jason played the role of supportive husband perfectly, nodding at the right moments, laughing when appropriate. Meanwhile, he kept an eye on Gerald, who was beginning to look uneasy. His phone buzzed several times, each notification pulling a bit more color from his face. David asked. When the CEO approached Gerald with a grim expression, Jason knew the moment had come. The two men stepped aside, their hushed conversation filled with sharp gestures and darting glances toward Amanda. Jason sipped his whiskey, savoring the unraveling chaos. As the tension in the room thickened, Amanda finally seemed to notice. Her eyes darted between Jason and Gerald, confusion clouding her features. Jason leaned in, his voice low and deliberate. "You might want to check your phone," he said. Amanda blinked, her hand trembling as she reached for her clutch. Jason leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips as he watched her expression shift from confusion to horror. The trap had been set, and now all he had to do was watch it spring shut. The grand ballroom buzzed with an uneasy energy. What had started as a glittering celebration was quickly transforming into a minefield of strained whispers and furtive glances. Jason leaned against the marble pillar near the entrance, his whiskey glass dangling from his fingertips. His heart thudded in his chest, but his face betrayed none of the turmoil within. Amanda, standing just a few feet away, scrolled through her phone, her movements frantic. The smile that had graced her lips earlier was now a distant memory. Jason didn't need to look to know what she'd found. Her carefully constructed life, exposed in digital form, sent to the very people she sought to impress, giving her more credibility in her view than he deserved, and was using, she thought, to impress him immensely. "Jason," she hissed, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. "We need to talk." He raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. Everything okay, Amanda?" "Don't play games with me," she snapped, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "What did you do?" Jason shrugged, taking a slow sip of his drink. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Before she could respond, Gerald appeared, his face pale and drawn. His confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, jerky gait. He grabbed Amanda's elbow, pulling her aside. Jason watched as they whispered urgently, their body language speaking volumes. Amanda's eyes widened with every word, and Jason could see her composure cracking. Aunt England was a policeman, and Clara was very close with him. Jason's swagger came and the door fast before Clara. She glanced back, and when she did, she saw Clara. "Is everything all right over there?" a colleague of Amanda's asked, approaching Jason with a curious glance toward the unfolding drama. Jason gave a tight smile. "Just a bit of work talk, I suppose. You know how these corporate types are, always bringing the office to the party." The colleague chuckled awkwardly, clearly unsure how to respond. Jason took the opportunity to excuse himself and move toward a better vantage point where he could observe without being noticed. As Amanda and Gerald argued in hushed tones, the CEO, a stern-looking woman in her late 50s, approached them with deliberate strides. Her expression was a mask of controlled fury. Amanda's hand flew to her mouth, muffling a gasp, while Gerald visibly flinched. As Amanda took the stage, Gerald whimpered to the CEO. "Damn it," he whispered. "I think it's so important that the detectives have their clients' names in the meet." The three of them stepped into a side room, the door closing firmly behind them. Jason could only imagine the conversation taking place inside. He'd crafted his email with precision, ensuring there was no ambiguity about the nature of Amanda and Gerald's relationship. The attachments had done the rest, painting a vivid and damning picture. Jason turned his attention back to the crowd. The whispers were growing louder, and he caught snippets of conversation as he moved through the room. "Prior to the release, Captain Jason stated that you were the first person to object to the separation of the clean airways from the healthy snacks in your first flight and turned you away. Did you hear about Gerald? Something's going down with HR. I always thought Amanda was a bit too cozy with him." "This will be the scandal of the year if it's true." Jason's lips twitched into a small smile. The seeds he planted were already bearing fruit. But the night wasn't over yet. Minutes later, the door to the side room opened, and Amanda emerged, her face ashen. Gerald followed, his head bowed. The CEO walked out last, her expression unreadable as she scanned the room. Jason locked eyes with her for a brief moment before she turned away, heading toward the stage. A hush fell over the crowd as she took the microphone. The room's attention shifted instantly, the murmurs fading into silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the CEO began, her voice calm but firm, "I apologize for interrupting the evening's festivities, but I need to address a matter of utmost importance. It has come to my attention that there have been serious breaches of professional conduct within our organization. These allegations are currently under investigation, and appropriate actions will be taken." Jason watched as Amanda's shoulders slumped. The CEO's words were vague, but the intent was clear. The glittering evening Amanda had envisioned had turned into a public reckoning. As the CEO stepped down from the stage, the room buzzed anew. Amanda remained rooted to the spot, her eyes darting around as if seeking an escape route. Jason approached her, his steps measured, his expression carefully neutral. "Any chance of forgetting this night?" Jason shrugged. "Amanda," he said, his voice low but firm, "can we talk?" She turned to him, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. "You did this," she accused, her voice shaking. "How could you? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Jason tilted his head, feigning contemplation. "I exposed the truth, Amanda. That's all. You've ruined everything," she spat. "Do you think this makes you the hero? Do you think this fixes anything? Because that's not the way life works, Gretchen. For the winners, you have to lose. The failures, you have to learn from." Jason leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Fixing things isn't my goal. Justice is." Her eyes filled with tears, but Jason felt no sympathy. He thought of the nights he'd spent questioning his own sanity, the lies she'd told with such ease. This was her doing, not his. And yet, in the back of his head, he could see the truth, and that was this. Claire did love him, and that was all he needed to hear. "I loved you," she said, her voice barely audible. Jason shook his head. "Oh, Amanda, you loved yourself. You loved the thrill, the lies, the game. And now you get to face the consequences." Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing amidst the ruins of her carefully curated life. The sense of closure was bittersweet, but it was closure nonetheless. The night wasn't Jason's to celebrate, but it wasn't hers to own either. It was simply the truth coming to light, as it always does. Jason left the opulent banquet hall without a backward glance, the faint hum of conversations and clinking glasses fading into the night. The cool evening air hit his face as he descended the marble steps, his chest tight with a whirlwind of emotions. Satisfaction, relief, and an underlying sadness he couldn't quite shake. He walked toward the waiting line of town cars and taxis, nodding to the valet, who opened the door for him. Once inside the cab, Jason leaned back against the leather seat and exhaled deeply. He had imagined this moment countless times in the days leading up to the gala. He thought he'd feel triumphant, perhaps even vindicated. Instead, a strange hollowness settled over him, a reminder of the cost of his actions. As the city lights blurred past the window, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out, already knowing who it was. Sure enough, Amanda's name flashed on the screen. He let it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. A text this time. "Jason, please, let's talk. I'm begging you." Jason stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the delete button. After a moment, he locked the screen and slid the phone back into his pocket. There was nothing left to say. Jason stared at the message, which was written in blue. "Start rodeo." The next morning, Jason woke to a barrage of notifications. His social media accounts were flooded with messages, some from acquaintances offering their support, others from strangers who had pieced together fragments of last night's events. A few were from mutual friends of Amanda's, their tone veering between shock and judgment. Direct messages from the church continued to reach him, leading him that direction first, then traveled to social media, turned by friends, bosses at work, rivals, classmates, some from people he'd known for years on and off, and some banded. He ignored them all and focused on the email from the private investigator he had hired weeks ago. The final report had arrived, detailing Amanda's affair in meticulous detail. Times, places, even snippets of overheard conversations. Jason had already seen most of the evidence, but seeing it compiled into a single damning document made his stomach churn. Among the findings was an account of a lavish dinner Gerald had arranged for Amanda, held at a private dining club known for its discretion. The investigator had captured a blurry photo of the two of them sitting close, their heads bent together in intimate conversation. Gerald's hand rested casually on Amanda's knee. Jason clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening as he stared at the image. He thought he'd moved past the anger, but it surged anew, sharp and hot. He closed the laptop abruptly, as if shutting it could banish the memories. At noon, Jason received a call from an unknown number. He debated letting it go to voicemail, but answered on the third ring. "Mr. Bennett?" a curt professional voice asked. "This is Jason." "This is Karen Sullivan, head HR at Amanda's company. I'm calling regarding some recent developments involving your wife and an employee of ours, Gerald Harper." "What older woman?" said the man, raising his voice. My daughter lives here, and I'll be sure to put no bait and switches for the Gurners, said Gerald. Jason said nothing, letting the woman fill the silence. We've reviewed the evidence submitted yesterday, Karen continued, her voice tinged with discomfort. Given the seriousness of the allegations, both Amanda and Gerald have been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. I wanted to inform you, personally, before the matter becomes public knowledge. Jason allowed himself a small, humorless smile. Thank you for the update. He nodded. There's one more thing, Karen said, hesitating. The CEO has requested a meeting with you. She feels it would be beneficial to understand the context of the evidence you provided. Would you be willing to come in? Leary watched for a second more reaction and was relieved when none came. After the meeting, Leary returned to the table. He placed the envelope with the context of the evidence one more time before settling back to read the letter. Jason considered this. Part of him wanted nothing more to do with the situation, but another part, the one that had pushed him to expose the affair, wanted to ensure the consequences were fully realized. I'll be there, he said finally. The meeting took place later that afternoon in the CEO's private office. The space was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Jason sat across from the CEO, who regarded him with a mix of sympathy and respect. Then the president asked Jason the private question. So why do you see resistance? I appreciate your candor, Mr. Bennett, she began, folding her hands neatly on the desk. This situation is regrettable, to say the least. I assure you, we take these matters very seriously. Jason nodded, his expression unreadable. I didn't do this for your company. I did it because I deserved to know the truth. And the truth can be painful, the CEO said, her voice softening, but it's also necessary. We've terminated Gerald's contract effective immediately. As for Amanda, we're still reviewing her involvement. Jason's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Let me ask you something, the CEO continued, leaning forward. What are you hoping to achieve from all this? Jason paused, the weight of the question sinking in. Closure, he said simply. Closure. The CEO studied him for a moment before nodding. Then I hope you find it. By the time Jason returned home, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the cityscape. He stood on the balcony of his apartment, staring out at the skyline. The day had been exhausting, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of calm. In the shadows of the window, he could see the blue-painted buildings of his apartment. By the pool, for whose glitter the water was clear, his phone buzzed again. Amanda. He ignored it, stood up, turned off his phone. In the distance, the city lights flickered on, one by one illuminating the night. Jason took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs. He didn't know what the future held, but for now he was content to stand still and let the pieces fall where they may. 6 months later, Jason began a life-passing training program, heading more and more things off, and even convinced himself that he would start. The days following the gallop unfolded like a slow unraveling of a tapestry Amanda had spent years weaving. Jason watched from the sidelines as the fallout from her choices spread, leaving ripples in every aspect of their shared life. The emails and photos he'd sent to Amanda CEO had done more than embarrass her. They had punctured the carefully constructed image she'd cultivated, both professionally and socially. Jason read about Gerald's sudden termination in the business section of the local news a week later. The article vaguely referenced internal misconduct, but made no mention of Amanda. Still, Jason knew the whispers surrounding her would persist. For Amanda, silence replaced the usual flurry of texts and calls to Jason. The once frequent attempts to explain or plead her case dwindled into sporadic messages filled with anger, confusion, and a hint of desperation. Jason ignored them all, knowing any conversation now would only reopen wounds that had begun to scab over. One rainy evening, Jason sat in their dimly lit living room, the faint sound of raindrops tapping against the window. The apartment felt emptier now, though Amanda's belongings remained untouched. He hadn't decided what to do with them yet. Donating them seemed too impersonal, but throwing them out felt vindictive. The apartment itself was a strange contradiction, a space where so many memories had been made, but where trust had been shattered. The kitchen table still bore scratches from the time they'd laughed too hard and accidentally dragged a heavy dish across it. The couch was a reminder of countless late-night talks and lazy Sundays. Now these objects seemed to hold more weight than he was ready to bear. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, he was surprised to see Amanda standing there, her face pale and her hair damp from the rain. She looked smaller somehow, her usual confidence replaced with an air of defeat. "Jason," she began, her voice trembling. "Can I come in, just for a minute?" Jason hesitated before stepping aside. She walked in slowly, her eyes darting around the familiar space as if she were seeing it for the first time. "How are things going? I know you're close to getting back to rodeo." "I've lost everything," she said, turning to face him. "My job, my reputation." "You." Jason crossed his arms, his face impassive. "What did you expect, Amanda?" She looked down, twisting her hands together. "I didn't expect it to end like this. I made a mistake. No, I made a lot of mistakes. But you didn't have to destroy me." Jason's eyes narrowed. "Destroy you? You destroyed us. I just made sure you couldn't pretend otherwise anymore." Amanda flinched but didn't argue. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I thought I could fix things," she said finally, "that you'd forgive me." Jason sighed, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on him. "Amanda, forgiveness doesn't rebuild trust. It doesn't erase what you did. You didn't just cheat on me. You betrayed everything we built together. I can't undo that. And neither can you." She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry." She removed her hand from mine and closed her eyes. "I wanted you to know," she repeated, saying truly. For a moment, Jason felt a pang of sympathy, but he pushed it aside. Her apology, while sincere, couldn't change the past. "You need to move on, Amanda," he said gently. "I already have," she said. As Amanda left, Jason felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Her presence had reminded him of what he'd lost, but it also reinforced his resolve to move forward. He closed the door behind her and turned back to the quiet apartment, realizing it didn't feel quite as heavy as before. Weeks turned into months, and Jason found himself settling into a new rhythm. He threw himself into work, taking on new projects that occupied his time and gave him purpose. Outside of work, he reconnected with old friends he hadn't seen in years, rediscovering parts of himself that had been neglected during his marriage. One evening, while walking through the park, Jason met Sophie, a photographer who was setting up her camera by the lake. They struck up a conversation about the way the light hit the water, and something about her easy smile and genuine curiosity drew him in. Sophie was different from Amanda in every way, warm, unpretentious, and refreshingly honest. Over the weeks, their casual chats turned into coffee dates, and coffee dates became something more. Jason felt his guard slowly lowering, though he remained cautious, determined not to repeat past mistakes. When the party ended, Jason and Amanda both felt relief, updated, and safe. One sunny afternoon, Jason sat on the balcony of his apartment, watching Sophie sketch the view of the city skyline. She paused, catching him staring, and laughed. "What?" she asked, tilting her head. "Nothing," he said, smiling. "Just, I didn't think I'd feel like this again." Sophie reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. "Life's funny like that, isn't it?" Jason nodded, his gaze drifting to the horizon. The pain of Amanda's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined him. The future stretched out before him, uncertain, but full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Jason felt ready to embrace it. And